Chapter 1534 Arriving at the Stagnant Siderous Void. Chapter 1534 Arriving at the Stagnant Siderous Void. Author's note. Unedited chapter. The warp demolator continued carrying Gustav forward non-stop. The journey felt endless, and the routes stretching on and on for what seemed like centuries. Gustav always reminded himself to stay calm and focus. His golden body would have deactivated if he had stayed in for longer than 30 minutes. As his frame got pushed in deeper, the roots began to glow brighter. Gustav could feel the pull of the void, a subtle but powerful force guiding him toward a central point. He followed the current, his instincts leading him through the ever-expanding network. Hours turned into days, days into months, and months into years. Or so it seemed. In reality, less than 30 minutes had passed since he entered the warp demolator, but the distortion of time within the void made it feel like an eternity. His journey through the roots continued, and sometimes the glowing tendrils weaved a kind of time web around him. He could sense the presence of countless moments in time. He had been carried along this path for what felt like an eternity, but yet it kept going. The pressure on his body, mind, and soul was immense, but he had managed to endure it so far. However, a growing sense of unease gnawed at him. The strain on his golden body was becoming more pronounced with each passing moment, and he could feel his energy reserves depleting. If the golden body came undone now, it would spell his end within the warp demolator's relentless, destructive currents. Could it have been up to 30 minutes already? He wondered to himself. However, since he knew well that deactivation would spell his end, he had to do whatever it took to keep it going. Gustav had been relying on the warp demolator's momentum to carry him, but now he realized he needed to take matters into his own hands. With a determined expression, he tried to move forward, pushing against the invisible currents that bound him. It felt like moving through something incredibly sticky, each inch of progress requiring immense effort. "Damn it!" he grunted as his muscles strained against the resistance. "Why is it so hard to move in here?" Unbeknownst to Gustav, the warp demolator had its own set of laws that incapacitated movement unless it was implemented by its own flow. His attempts to move at his highest speed were met with frustrating resistance. He managed to push himself about 20 feet before he had to stop. His body trembled with exertion. "This isn't working," he said while panting heavily. "If I don't find a way to move faster, I'll run out of time." Gustav closed his eyes, trying to focus his thoughts. He had to find a way to harness enough power in the warp demolator to propel him forward. The golden body was strong, but even it had its limits. He needed to think creatively and speed up his travel time lest he ends up meeting his end in here. He suddenly looked down at the greenish and red boots on his feet. "Perhaps I should try it. But I need to be careful not to send myself out of the warp demolator by mistake," Gustav thought as he sent energy to the boots on his feet. He felt the pressure of the warp demolator recede momentarily as the void-stepping boots began to glow with an intense light. A surge of power coursed through his legs, and the moment he tried taking a step forward, his body vanished. In an instant, Gustav found himself cutting across the warp demolator with a speed faster than teleportation. It was as if the very fabric of space and time folded around him, propelling him through the warp demolator's currents with unimaginable velocity. This level of movement shouldn't have been possible, but it was happening. He reappeared somewhere deep within the warp demolator, surrounded by even larger roots that represented time and white lines that stretched across a vast area. Determined to continue, Gustav repeated the process of moving. The void-stepping boots activated once more, and he vanished, only to reappear further within the warp demolator. Each step took him deeper, the surroundings becoming more surreal and otherworldly. As he took steps forward, he could feel the boots working in tandem with his golden body, amplifying his speed and agility. The combination of the two allowed him to navigate the treacherous terrain of the warp demolator with ease. The roots and white lines around him grew even larger, intertwining in complex patterns that seemed to defy logic. The sight was mesmerizing. "This place is like a maze," he remarked as his eyes scanned the intricate web of roots and lines. He took another step, and the void-stepping boots activated again. This time, the speed was even greater, and he felt a sensation akin to being stretched and compressed simultaneously. It was disorienting, but he maintained his focus, reappearing in yet another part of the warp demolator. He took yet another step, and the boots propelled him forward once more. The surroundings blurred, and he felt himself moving through layers of reality, each one more intense than the last. The roots and white lines became a blur of light and motion, and he could feel he was getting close. As Gustav moved deeper into the warp demolator, the roots around him began to branch off in various directions. When this happened, he stopped using the boots and let warp demolator's current push him forward naturally. His surroundings became increasingly intricate, the roots and white lines forming a complex web that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of time itself. "This place is like a living organism," Gustav murmured. He soon arrived at an intersecting path within the warp demolator. The roots diverged into two separate directions, one path veered left, and the other went right. Gustav could only slow his movements, not stop them entirely, so he had to make a quick decision. Left or right? He wondered out loud. Which way leads to the stagnant Sider's void? All the time he had spent in here, Gustav had been dragged alongside orbital bodies. Moons, planets, and even stars has been his companions here. He would have made use of the direction they were being pulled off in to make a choice, but from the look of things, some were pulled left, and others right. He couldn't make his decision based off the direction the orbital bodies were being dragged in. Gustav suddenly recalled the words of Commander Ergril of the Tark's force. He had once mentioned something about the other time candidate message saying he should go left. Could this be what he was referring to? Gustav felt this had to be it. Otherwise it made no sense. All right, Ergril. I hope you're right about this. He willed himself to move left. The void-stepping boots glowed, propelling him forward and towards the left with incredible speed. The left path seemed to narrow as he progressed. The roots closed in around him, forming a tunnel-like structure. This feels different, Gustav noted while his eyes scanned the surroundings. Unlike the other times, he didn't feel as much pressure. He only felt more pull. The warp demolator continuously pushed Gustav through the left path, and soon he was back in an area where it was all just white lines. Gustav hoped he had made the right choice and activated the void-stepping boots again. He burst forward with the speed of the void-stepping boots. The path began to close up again, narrowing and constricting, which forced him to navigate with precision since he didn't want to end up outside of the warp demolator by mistake until he reached the end of the path. Just a bit further. Gustav's eyes narrowed in focus. He surged ahead, causing the void-stepping boots to glow with each step, propelling him forward with unprecedented speed. The white lines became a blur around him, and he could feel the energy intensifying. It was as if the warp demolator itself was urging him to continue, pushing him toward his destination. Suddenly, the path opened up into a vast expanse, and Gustav found himself at the end, which happened to look like the mouth of a large beast. The beast's maw yawned open, revealing rows of jagged teeth and an abyss beyond. Before he could react, the beast swallowed him whole, and everything went dark. Shit! Gustav's voice trailed off as he unleashed more power from his golden body form, hoping to fight his way out. Unfortunately, the darkness was impenetrable. He felt himself being pulled deeper and deeper until he was drifting away in an endless void. Gustav found himself in a surrounding filled with debris. Floating rocks and orbital bodies marked with destruction were scattered across the place. When Gustav looked around properly, he could see an uncountable lineup of planets around him. This was the stagnant Sider's void, a part of outer space in the future that didn't exist in Gustav's time yet. Chapter 1535 Landing on a Familiar Planet. Chapter 1535 Landing on a Familiar Planet. Author's note. Unedited chapter. A lot of these planets were either shells of their former selves or their surfaces destroyed and marked with dark scorches. This place, Gustav muttered. It's like a graveyard of worlds. What happened here? He floated amidst the celestial ruins, his golden body glowing faintly in the oppressive darkness. The planets, though numerous, all seemed lifeless. Some were mere husks, their surfaces cracked and barren. Others bore the scars of unimaginable battles, their landscapes torn apart by forces beyond comprehension. There is no doubt about it. This is the stagnant Siderus void, Gustav voiced. A void in time and space where the echoes of destruction linger. He could feel the void drawing every essence of happiness within him, like there was an invisible force around. It was as if the very fabric of this place fed on despair, amplifying the emptiness and sorrow of its surroundings. I'll have to be careful even here, Gustav realized. If I lose myself here, I'll never find what I'm looking for. He glanced around, taking in the sight of thousands of abandoned and majorly destroyed planets. Gustav knew he had to find out which one was planet Humbad. Miss Amy said this wouldn't be easy, he recalled. She must have known about the mental and emotional toll this place would take. Quite terrifying. He floated towards one of the closer planets, examining its surface. The planet was covered in deep fissures, with molten lava seeping from its core. The air was thick with ash, and the landscape was littered with the remnants of a once thriving civilization. This isn't it, Gustav thought. Planet Humbad. How do I tell which one it is when most of them look the same? He moved on to the next planet, a desolate wasteland with no signs of life. The ground was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the sky was a perpetually dark, stormy gray. Lightning crackled in the distance, illuminating the barren terrain. Another dead world, he muttered. How many more of these are there? He continued his search, moving from one planet to the next. Each one told a story of devastation, of once great civilizations reduced to ruins. The further he went, the heavier the weight of the void pressed upon him. This void. Despite my powerful mental fortitude, it's starting to make me feel despaired, Gustav realized. This wasn't a new feeling to him, but he hadn't felt such since over 4 years ago before he got the system. The golden body was dimming, and once it got completely deactivated he wouldn't be able to reactivate it any time soon, so he had to prepare to tackle the oppressiveness of the Siderus void without its help. His mind raced with thoughts and memories, trying to piece together any clues that might lead him to his destination. Humbad, he thought. Did Miss Amy leave any hints as to how I'll locate it amidst all of these? There has to be a way to identify it, he reasoned. Finding planet Humbad was going to be a Herculean task. There were moons, dead stars, and many orbital bodies around as well. It looked like every essence of life was being absorbed by the stagnant Siderus void. Gustav floated among the debris, his golden glow dimming more before he finally decided to deactivate it to conserve energy. The oppressive force of the void weight increased, making every movement feel laborious. It really is like a black hole for life, he muttered, gazing at the desolate expanse around him. I need to find Humbad quickly before this void drains me completely. He started by spreading his perception out. Although his golden body was deactivated, his perception was still capable of spreading across a very wide range. Gustav focused, sending out tendrils of his awareness to explore the surrounding space. As his perception extended, he felt the void pushing back and drawing his energy away. The stagnant Siderus void seemed to be actively resisting his efforts to probe its depths. Miss Amy warned me about this, Gustav thought, gritting his teeth. I can't afford to waste energy here. Every bit counts. He retracted his perception, feeling the strain of the void's pull. It was like trying to move through quicksand, each attempt sapping more of his strength. She said there are threats in the stagnant Siderus void. I can't let my guard down, Gustav recalled Miss Amy's words. After searching through for many minutes, he floated in place for a moment, considering his options. The planets, moons, and dead stars around him were numerous. Each planet he encountered was in a similar state of decay, making it nearly impossible to identify which one was planet Humbad. Anyone could be planet Humbad. However, searching them all individually would be impossible. He needed a more efficient method. This place is even worse than I imagined, he muttered, looking at the countless celestial bodies strewn around like discarded toys. Is the warp demolator responsible, or did something else happen? He wondered out loud. I need to make sure this never happens. The void was eerily silent, the only sounds being the occasional creaks and groans of crumbling planetary fragments. Gustav tried to spread his perception again, but it was like trying to push through molasses. The void seemed to resist his every effort, pulling his energy away. Since he still hadn't discovered a way to efficiently locate planet Humbad, his only option remained checking the planets. With incredible speed, he moved cautiously from planet to planet. Gustav made use of the void's stepping boots to close in light years distances in just an instant. Planet Humbad has to be here somewhere. He had to keep his determination alive or the void would eat it away. The void seemed to stretch on forever, an endless expanse of destruction and decay. As he floated past another ruined world, he felt a pang of sadness. He flew towards it and landed on its surface. Gustav took a deep breath, feeling the strange air of the demolished planet fill his lungs. The familiarity of the place tugged at his memory, though he couldn't quite place it. The surface of the planet was a desolate wasteland, with scorched grounds and blackened structures marking the scars of ancient battles. Deep holes pockmarked the landscape, some still smoldering with the remnants of past fires. Is this it? Is this planet Humbad? He wondered aloud with an uncertain tone. He had explored countless planets already, each one a shell of its former self, and he knew this one could be just another dead end. Yet something about this place felt different. The familiarity. His void stepping boots had been a blessing and a curse. The ability to traverse hundreds of light years in a single step was extraordinary, but it also made it easy to overshoot his destinations. Learning to control them was difficult, but he had become more adept with each use. Gustav took another cautious step forward, his eyes scanning the ruined landscape. The remnants of buildings, some still towering despite the destruction, loomed over him. He walked through what seemed to have been a city square, now a barren wasteland with only the skeletal remains of structures hinting at its former glory. This place, it feels like I've been here before, he thought. He continued to walk, the crunch of debris under his boots the only sound in the eerie silence. As he moved deeper into the ruined city, he noticed that the destruction here seemed more concentrated, more deliberate. It wasn't just the random chaos of a natural disaster, it was the calculated devastation of a war zone. What could have happened? His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the damage. He came across a particularly deep hole, its edges charred and jagged. Peering into its depths, he saw a red glow emanating from below. Gustav explored the surroundings more and made a few discoveries. He saw a massive circular structure, cracked and nearly completely crumbled at a particular area that looked like it used to be a road. Gustav inspected it, causing his suspicion to grow the more he looked around. Soon, he recognized the planet to be Earth and couldn't hide his shock. He stood on what used to be Plankton City, now buried under ash and darkness. Does this mean? Gustav knew Earth was still okay back where he was coming from, so what exactly did this mean? As he continued exploring, a dark, large shadowy hand phased out of the ground and headed for him. Atomic manipulation has been activated. A burst of milky-colored light surrounded him as Gustav immediately used atomic disintegration to rip through the shadowy hand. What was that? Gustav wondered but didn't get more time to contemplate as dark mist suddenly phased out of the ground. The hand reformed and went after Gustav again. The moment contact was made, part of Gustav's flesh turned dark. Gustav hadn't seen this coming and his perception was slower than usual due to the void. He gritted his teeth against the pain while jumping backwards multiple times to leave a wide distance between himself and the arm. However, another shadowy arm suddenly phased out from the ground right behind him. Chapter 1536 Getting Close. Chapter 1536 Getting Close. Author's note. Unedited chapter. Gustav reactivated his golden body form in time, causing a radiant light to envelop him. The hand that had lunged at him burned upon contact, forcing the shadowy hand to shrink away. Gustav's darkened flesh also returned to its natural state, but Gustav could feel the lingering effects of the encounter. What was that thing? He wondered once more. Gustav had destroyed it before and yet it returned, so he wasn't sure it was gone for good even after getting rid of it again. His instincts proved correct when he was attacked again, this time by multiple shadowy hands emerging from the ground. They moved with eerie coordination, each one trying to latch onto him and spread their corruption. Gustav unleashing a powerful burst of energy that disintegrated the hands. But even as they fell apart, they began to reform, their dark essence refusing to be vanquished. Gustav continuously did his best to escape physical contact with the shadowy hands. Using his atomic disintegration, he managed to temporarily dissipate many of them, but they always reformed, no matter what he did. Acquisition has been activated. Gustav activated acquisition to see if it could be of any help in this situation. Unfortunately, nothing happened. The hands still came at him. Gustav guessed that these hands didn't count as beings with supernatural abilities. Realizing that his efforts were futile, Gustav decided to flee the surroundings and leave the shadowy entities alone for now. This isn't getting me anywhere, he thought with a slight look of frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. I need to find out more about what's going on here. Gustav activated his void-stepping boots again, vanishing from the spot and reappearing on the other side of the planet. He continued to explore the decomposed remains of what used to be Earth. As he moved through the ruins, he saw more of the dark, shadowy entities. Some took the form of hands, like the one that attacked him earlier, while others appeared as amorphous blobs of darkness that seemed to absorb all light around them. They moved sluggishly as if they were drawn to any semblance of life or energy. These things are everywhere, Gustav muttered to himself, watching one of the shadowy blobs engulf a piece of debris, turning it into darkened ash. What could have caused this? How did Earth, and possibly other planets, end up like this? He continued to theorize as he moved. Could this be the after effects of that? Gustav had a number of guesses, but his mind main hinged on a particular one. His thoughts were interrupted by another shadowy hand emerging from the ground. He quickly void-stepped away, avoiding contact and reappearing a safe distance from the entity. I can't let them touch me again. He decided to explore other planets in the surrounding void, hoping to find more clues. Using his void-stepping boots, he began to traverse the vast expanse of space, moving from one desolate planet to another. Each one bore the same signs of destruction and shadowy infestation. Their surfaces were scorched and marked with deep craters. Every planet is the same, he observed, standing on the surface of a particularly large planet. It's like a plague has swept through this entire region, leaving nothing but darkness and decay in its wake. As he explored, he noticed that the shadowy entities varied in form and behavior. Some were aggressive, like the hands that had attacked him, while others seemed more passive, simply existing in their darkened state. He also observed that the entities seemed to be drawn to any source of light or energy, which explained why they had attacked him. I can't waste any more time, he thought as his eyes scanned the desolate landscape. I need to find Planet Humbad. Gustav had looked around enough to get a general idea of what caused all of this, but this was the future. It hadn't happened yet, and there was still hope. What he needed to do now more than ever was find Planet Humbad, but the problem of which direction to head in remained. He suddenly got an idea and opened the system panel. From the system panel, he decided to check his 5 years' quests. Or specifically, the one he hadn't completed yet. Locate Dimension 6 on Planet Humbad, progress, 89.10/100%. Gustav noticed that the percentage fluctuated as he moved. He took a step toward the west, watching the progress decrease to 89.5%. Turning to the northeast, the percentage climbed back up to 89.15%. Northeast it is, he muttered to himself while taking off into the air with a burst of speed. The void-stepping boots activated, propelling him forward with incredible velocity. He flew through the stagnant siderous void, causing the remnants of destroyed planets and moons to blur past him. The journey was arduous, with Gustav encountering more of the dark, shadowy entities along the way. They seemed to be drawn to his presence, reaching out with their tendrils in an attempt to ensnare him. Despite the burst of speed from the void-stepping boots which gave him the ability to travel hundreds of light years in just an instant, he would still encounter the shadowy entities. They're everywhere. Gustav noticed that sometimes they even appeared in space, above the decimated planets. He flew over the charred remains of what had once been thriving cities, now nothing more than crumbling ruins swallowed by darkness. Each new planet he encountered seemed to share the same fate, a grim reminder of the void's corrupting influence. As he flew, Gustav kept an eye on the system panel, monitoring the progress percentage. It was slow, but it was increasing, guiding him ever closer to his goal. Gustav felt like he had been moving for hours already, but who knew if this part of space was bound by the normal laws of time? For all he knew, it could have been months already. Nevertheless, he kept soaring through the stagnant siderous void. His focus remained steadfast on the system panel in his vision, the progress bar slowly creeping upwards. Locate Dimension 6 on planet Humbad, progress, 98.00/100%. Just a bit more. Gustav muttered to himself, his voice barely audible in the vacuum of space. As the percentage reached 98, Gustav's surroundings began to distort. He found himself caught in a peculiar phenomenon. The fabric of space-time seemed to twist and ripple around him. Every time he surged forward, he was inexplicably transported to a different location within the void. Locate Dimension 6 on planet Humbad, progress, 95.00/100%. What is this? Gustav frowned, attempting to comprehend the nature of this spatial anomaly. He tried again, using his lightning blitz to increase his speed, hoping to break through whatever was hindering his progress. In a flash, he found himself somewhere else, the scenery unchanged but the coordinates different. Locate Dimension 6 on planet Humbad, progress, 94.00/100%. The progress percentage reduction was particularly frustrating. No matter what I do, it's the same result, Gustav muttered. He paused for a moment, hovering in the void, and pondered his situation. If the direct approach isn't working, perhaps there's another way. Gustav decided to try a different tactic. He reached out with his perception, extending it as far as he could within the constraints of the stagnant siderous void. Despite the oppressive environment, he focused on sensing any anomalies or disturbances that might explain the warping space. Unfortunately, he couldn't really pick up on much, but he could tell that the spatial anomaly was like a wall that extended far deep into the stagnant siderous void. One thing he knew about walls was that they always had an end. With this thought in mind, Gustav decided to go around it. The void's stepping boots glowed and he took a step forward. Through he instantly reappeared, 5,000 light years away from his initial position. Locate Dimension 6 on planet Humbad, progress, 91.00/100%. The progress percentage had reduced by so much, but Gustav could still sense the spatial anomaly around, so he stepped forward once more. Through this time he reappeared, 10,000 light years away. Locate Dimension 6 on planet Humbad, progress, 84.00/100%. Gustav couldn't sense the spatial anomaly anymore and immediately turned to the side before surging forward with speed. He inputted more energy into the void's stepping boots this time and crossed a distance of more than 10,000 light years in a single second. Fortunately, he was not sent reeling back this time. Progress 92. 10%. He let out a sigh of relief after seeing the progression. He was on the right track. He continued forward, watching the percentage steadily climb. Almost there, Gustav thought. He kept pushing forward, and soon, he found himself in an area where planets were few and far between. The void seemed to stretch endlessly, but there was a subtle difference in the atmosphere. As Gustav moved further, the number of planets in the surroundings kept reducing. Chapter 1537 Reaching Planet Humbad. Chapter 1537 Reaching Planet Humbad. Author's note: unedited chapter. As Gustav moved further, the number of planets in the surroundings kept reducing. The percentage on his quest readout steadily increased, reaching 99.5%. In the distance, He saw a planet unlike any other he had encountered in this desolate region. The planet's surface was marked by a massive hole that covered about 35% of its entirety, glowing with the ominous red of bubbling magma. Gustav knew immediately that this had to be planet Humbad. He surged forward at incredible speed, his focus entirely on his destination. However, his rapid approach was abruptly halted. Two massive dark hands appeared, seemingly materializing out of the planet itself. A colossal being emerged from behind the planet, its size dwarfing even the largest celestial bodies. This creature was at least 6 times the size of planet Humbad, with its form shrouded in shadow and darkness. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent red light, and its body was covered in scales that seemed to shift and ripple like liquid shadow. Huge, ragged wings extended from its back, adding to its terrifying presence. Gustav barely had time to react before one of the massive shadowy claws swiped at him. Instinctively, he dodged with a burst of speed from his void-stepping boots, narrowly avoiding the destructive swipe. The force of the claw's movement caused shockwaves that rippled through the void, distorting space and time. Drawing upon his vast array of abilities, Gustav launched an offensive maneuver. He raised his hand, and a surge of atomic disintegration energy flowed from his fingertips. The milky white energy streaked towards the massive creature, aiming to break through its dark form. The beam collided with the creature's chest, creating a hole that was incredibly large, but just like mist, the hole soon covered up. The creature roared in pain and anger, swiping its other claw at Gustav. He narrowly avoided it again, moving with lightning speed. However, the creature was relentless. It continued to attack, each swipe faster and more ferocious than the last. Gustav was able to evade its attack and continuously rip through it with his own counterattack, but despite that, the creature remained relentless. The dark shadowy being's massive swipes sent forth storming winds and rifts of energy that threatened to obliterate anything in their path. Gustav recognized the imminent danger and quickly unleashed Kohelia. Multicolored layers of rhombus-shaped lights phased out from his body, forming a gigantic hole that swallowed up the attack entirely. The dark being, now fully revealed, was a towering monstrosity, at least 6 times the size of planet Humbad. Its body was a swirling mass of darkness, with shadowy claws that seemed to absorb the light around them. Its eyes, which were like glowing red orbs, the size of a moon, locked onto Gustav with malevolent intent. Gustav knew that using his most powerful attacks directly could risk damaging planet Humbad and possibly destroying it completely, so he had to be careful. He needed to get the dark being away if he wanted to use Kohelia to consume it. As the creature prepared for another attack, Gustav launched himself towards it, weaving through the air with lightning speed. The dark being swiped again. Its claws cut through space, causing streaks of destruction to sweep across the environment. Gustav dodged, but even the near miss sent shockwaves through his body. He gritted his teeth, realizing the sheer power of his opponent. This is getting problematic, he thought. Gustav summoned SJ with a thought, and it knew what to do. SJ emitted a bright glow before transforming into a replica of the dark being. The two entities stood face to face, mirroring each other. One could tell that the original was quite shocked. Gustav commanded the SJ to move far away from planet Humbad with a plan in his mind. With a roar, the dark being sent forth more attacks forward while Gustav did his best to evade. He followed SJ with incredible speed, causing them to head farther and farther away from planet Humbad. Gustav gathered his strength, preparing Kohelia for a decisive blow. As the SJ moved further away, Gustav positioned himself strategically. "No," he whispered while focusing all his energy into Kohelia. The SJ, sensing Gustav's command, suddenly exchanged places with the dark being. In a split second, the real dark being found itself far from planet Humbad, facing a fully unleashed Kohelia. Gustav unleashed the multicolored energy with a force that shook the very fabric of space. Kohelia rhombus-shaped lights glowed intensely as it expanded, engulfing the enormous dark being. The creature let out a deafening roar, thrashing wildly, but Kohelia continued to swallow it. Gustav watched intently in silent awe. The dark being's resistance was formidable, but Kohilia's consuming power was relentless. The swirling mass of darkness was soon completely swallowed up within the multicolored lights. "You're done," Gustav muttered. The remnants of the shadowy energy dissipated, leaving nothing but the vast emptiness of space. Gustav took a deep breath before turning his attention back to planet Humbad. The massive hole, which was red like live magma, still bubbled ominously on its surface. Gustav knew his mission wasn't over yet. He had to find Dimension 6 and complete his quest. Gustav descended towards the planet with his senses on high alert. He felt a mix of anticipation and wariness as he hovered above the desolate surface of planet Humbad. The sight before him was haunting, vast stretches of land marred by craters, smoking fissures, and scorched earth. It was clear that this planet had seen immense devastation, with no signs of any remaining structures or signs of civilization. The massive hole covering 35% of the planet's surface was quite visible. Its center casted an eerie light across the surroundings. Gustav landed softly, causing his boots to crunch against the cracked ground. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and ash. He retrieved SJ and it floated before him. He rubbed its surface affectionately before it vanished. The percentage on his system display read 99.9%. Almost there. All he needed to do now was find Dimension 6. Gustav activated his perception, spreading it out in all directions, seeking any clues about Dimension 6. Suddenly he detected a faint but distinct life force nearby. His eyes widened in surprise. "There's someone here?" he muttered to himself, astonished. The life force felt powerful and ancient, far from ordinary. Gustav began to move cautiously with his senses on high alert. He flew over the devastated landscape, following the life force. The terrain was challenging, with jagged rocks and deep crevices making it difficult to navigate. The closer he got, the stronger the life force became. As he approached the source, Gustav descended into a massive crater. The air grew colder, and an unsettling silence enveloped the area. The crater itself was the size of multiple cities combined, so he still kept flying forward. The desolate environment stretched out before Gustav, a barren wasteland of jagged rocks and eerie silence. The air was thick with the remnants of a once thriving civilization, now reduced to rusting metal and crumbling structures. A strange energy lingered in the atmosphere. Gustav navigated through the debris, his senses heightened as he followed the faint signal of a living presence. The sky above was a sickly shade of purple, streaked with ominous clouds that hinted at a storm brewing in the distance. As he ventured deeper into the heart of the ruins, the outline of a colossal structure began to take shape on the horizon. There, in the middle of a decayed mechanical ring that once served as a transportation hub, stood a feminine figure in all-white attire. The ring, though ancient and broken, still exuded a faint glow, remnants of the technology that had powered it. This feminine figure had an almost ethereal. Her ash-colored hair cascaded down her back in waves, catching the muted light and giving her a divine glow. She was clad in a flowing dress that clung to her curvy hips and accentuated her slender waist. Her skin was flawless, a soft porcelain that seemed untouched by the harsh environment around her. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet that sparkled with warmth as they met Gustav's. "Well, if it isn't my favorite troublemaker." A smile spread across her unfathomably beautiful face as she spoke. Gustav felt a rush of emotions at this moment. "Miss Amy," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "So you've been here all this time? I've been waiting for you." Her melodic voice rang out. He closed the distance between them, and they embraced in a passionate hug that conveyed the depth of their connection. For a moment, the desolate surroundings faded away, and it was just the two of them, reunited at last. "Everything makes sense now," Gustav said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. "This is why you knew so much about the warp demolator, and what I needed to do." Miss Amy nodded in affirmation. "You're not wrong, but there's more to it." Chapter 1538 Catching Up with Miss Amy. Chapter 1538 Catching Up with Miss Amy. Author's note. Unedited chapter. The embrace between Miss Amy and Gustav was warm and familiar. For a moment, The bleak surroundings seemed to vanish, replaced by the comfort of their reunion. Gustav felt a lump in his throat. He hadn't realized just how much he missed her. When they finally pulled apart, Miss Amy scrutinized him with her sharp gaze. "You've gotten bigger," she remarked with a tone of surprise. "What have they been feeding you? You almost look like a grown-up now." Gustav chuckled. "And you, Miss Amy, look a little shorter now." Miss Amy pulled his cheeks with a peal of light laughter. "You cheeky little. I can't believe you're here." "Everything makes sense now," Gustav said while pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. "This is why you knew so much about the warp demolator, and what I needed to do." Miss Amy nodded in affirmation. "You're not wrong, but there's more to it." "There is?" Gustav had a look of curiosity on his face. "They'll tell you everything, but before that, bring me up to speed on everything that has happened so far, kiddo," Miss Amy said with a smile. The landscape of the desolate planet stretched out before them. It was a bleak expanse marked by destruction and chaos. The ground was pockmarked with deep craters, each one glowing with a man-like light at the bottom, casting an eerie, reddish glow across the barren terrain. The sky above was a perpetual twilight, heavy with dark clouds that seemed to choke out any hope of sunlight. Not like there was any in the stagnant Sidorus void. They were standing at the center of a decayed technological ring, a relic of a once sophisticated transport system now reduced to rusted and twisted metal. The scent of ash and decay lingered around. Gustav adjusted his jacket, its edges singed and worn from his travels. He looked at Miss Amy, who seemed almost out of place in this environment, her presence a beacon of familiarity and strength. The ground around was a desolate expanse of charred, jagged rocks. They made their way towards a particular position. They found a spot to sit, a flat rock that offered a somewhat comfortable perch. Gustav began recounting everything that had happened in Miss Amy's absence. He started from the moment he became a fugitive on Earth. He told her about the false accusations, the solo objectives he had to accomplish, and his struggle on the run avoiding manslaughter. Miss Amy listened intently, occasionally interrupting with questions or exclamations of disbelief. "And then," Gustav continued, "I would have tried to contact you, but I didn't want to be a bother. I figured it was time for me to start taking care of my own problems." Miss Amy's response was immediate. She knocked him lightly on the head, just as she had always done when he said something particularly foolish. "You idiot," she said, her tone affectionate but firm. "You should know by now that I will always show up for you. As many times as it takes." "Ouch." Gustav rubbed his head while smiling. I know. But you've already done so much for me. I didn't want to drag you into my mess." Miss Amy sighed as her expression softened. "Gustav, I may not have told you before, you're the one person I'll always look out for. So long as I am around, you don't have to face anything alone." Her words hit him hard, and he felt a surge of emotions but did his best to hide them. "When did you become so sentimental? Is old age finally starting to catch up?" "I missed you too, you stubborn fool," she replied while knocking his head again. Gustav held his head while both of them suddenly burst out in laughter. It had been too long since they spoke like this. The Demon Queen and the one person who could make her display an array of emotions that usually wasn't present for anyone else. Gustav felt a sense of nostalgia. The only difference about this and the old times was their location as well as current level of strength. "So," Gustav began, his voice echoing slightly in the still air, "you've really been in Planet Humbad all this time?" Miss Amy nodded with a look of seriousness. "Yes." Gustav's eyes wandered over the decayed ring. "It's hard to imagine this place once had life." Miss Amy smiled faintly. "Indeed. But things change. Sometimes drastically." She paused, her gaze locking onto his. "Gustav, I was aware when you were branded as a universal fugitive." Gustav's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew?" "Yes," she said softly. "Before I could do anything about it, I was accosted by a strange figure on my planet. This figure knew everything about you, your situation, and how things would turn out." "Who was this person?" Gustav inquired. Miss Amy took a deep breath. They called themselves a time candidate. A time candidate? Gustav repeated as he recalled Commander Ergril. Was it a Tark? Exactly, she confirmed. This time candidate told me that I had to follow specific steps to help you. They knew you would be in danger if things played out precisely according to how you plotted them, so I played a crucial role in your survival. What kind of steps? Although Gustav could already tell, he still asked. They gave me a set of instructions, Miss Amy explained. They told me to create a clone of myself to handle things on my planet while I came here to wait for you. The clone took care of all the necessary procedures to ensure you could get here safely. Gustav stared at her, processing the information. So that's why. Miss Amy nodded. I've been here for a long time. I lost track of the days, but I knew you'd make it here eventually. She looking out at the desolate landscape with a thoughtful expression. I am meant to lead you to Dimension 6, where the truth about your origin and everything else will be unveiled. A strange, ominous wind began to blow, swirling dust and debris around them. The wind carried a faint, eerie whisper, as if the planet itself was trying to communicate with them. You know where Dimension 6 is? He questioned. And what do you mean by origin? Miss Amy's gaze remained distant. I can't explain everything right now. The time candidate's instructions were clear. Direct you to planet Humbad, and personally lead you to Dimension 6. What's in Dimension 6 that I need to see? And why do you seem so evasive about it? Gustav's suspicion rose. She turned to him with a smile. Gustav, some truths are too dangerous to reveal all at once. But once you get to Dimension 6, you will get the answers you seek. I see. Gustav looked around the surroundings. I guess the existence of this place confirms the theory about planet Humbad's destruction. The Slarkovs lied. Miss Amy nodded. Yes, the Slarkovs' history is tied to this place. Thousands of years of their civilization's secrets lie buried here, crumbling before our eyes. Gustav's mind reeled. The Slarkovs had always claimed their home planet was destroyed in a catastrophic event, but here he was, standing on the very soil they once called home. The realization that they had lied about such a fundamental aspect of their history was staggering. He always knew, but it was another thing to confirm the suspicions physically. He turned back to Miss Amy. Tell me the truth, Miss Amy, what am I supposed to find in Dimension 6? What does it have to do with me? Listen, kiddo, all I can say is you will find answers about your past, your powers, and your true purpose and origins of a lot of things. I can't explain much about Dimension 6, but just prepare yourself. The wind howled louder, whipping Gustav's jacket and sending chills through his body. He clenched his fists in anticipation. Where is it? Gustav inquired. Miss Amy turned around and pointed in a particular direction. Shall we get to it then? He stated while getting to his feet. Are you ready? Miss Amy asked him. Gustav nodded in response while Miss Amy got to her feet. She placed her hand on Gustav's left shoulder, and they immediately vanished from their spot. Gustav and Miss Amy reappeared before a massively caved-in part of the planet. The ground was opened up into an immense chasm that stretched as far as the eye could see. The scent of sulfur permeated the surroundings, and a red, man-like glow emanated from the depths below, casting eerie shadows on the jagged walls of the crater. Gustav stared into the abyss with a slight look of trepidation. Is Dimension 6 down there? He asked. It's down there all right, she said with a serious tone. But you need to be very careful while we're descending. Down there is a part of the planet that is extremely fragile. If you channel your bloodline, it could cause the entire planet to split in half. Chapter 1539 Uncharted Descent. Chapter 1539 Uncharted Descent. Author's note. Unedited chapter. Gustav nodded in understanding. So no powers? Yes. Don't channel at all. They began their descent, using the rough edges of the chasm to slowly make their way down. The walls of the crater were uneven, with sharp protrusions and narrow ledges that offered precarious footing. They jumped from one protrusion to the next, each movement calculated and deliberate. The descent was slow and treacherous. The deeper they went, the more intense the heat became, and the glow from the magma pits below grew brighter. Inasmuch as Miss Amy had told Gustav not to channel his bloodline, he was still very much unaffected by this level of heat. A normal mixed blood would have been toast by now, but Gustav still had inbuilt durability. "How deep do you think this goes?" Gustav asked while maintaining a steady gaze. "It's hard to say," Miss Amy replied, her voice calm and steady. "But it might take a while." As they continued to descend, the walls of the chasm seemed to close in around them. The air grew thicker and more oppressive. The glow from the magma pits illuminated the rocky surfaces, casting a reddish hue that made the entire scene feel surreal. Gustav glanced over at Miss Amy, who moved with ease. "You seem to know your way around here," he remarked. "I've had some time to explore," she said with a faint smile. The ledges grew narrower the further they descended, forcing them to be even more cautious. Gustav's entire body was at a very high temperature at this moment, but he maintained an unfazed look. After what felt like hours of careful maneuvering, the walls of the chasm were now almost vertical, forcing them to rely on handholds and footholds that were barely wide enough to support them. The air remained thick with heat and the stench of sulfur. Despite the challenges, they pressed on. The glow from the magma pits made the rocky surfaces appear almost molten. "Watch your step," Miss Amy cautioned as they approached a particularly narrow ledge. "One wrong move and we could fall, and you'd have to use energy which could cause a split." Gustav nodded as he carefully navigated the narrow path. His fingers clung to the rough rock as he maintained his balance. The ledge was barely wide enough to support them, and the heat from the magma pits below was becoming unbearable for his special-made outfit. The walls of the chasm seemed to pulse with a rhythmic energy. Miss Amy and Gustav continued their descent into the chasm. The journey had been ongoing for 12 hours at this point, and they were still at it. The terrain was a mix of narrow ledges, steep drops, and jagged rocks. Sometimes the edges were sloppy enough for them to walk down, but other times they had to jump from one protrusion to the next. Each step brought them closer to the heart of the desolate planet, and the bubbling sound of magma below grew louder, accompanied by an increasing heat that would have been unbearable for anyone else. Despite the oppressive environment, Gustav and Miss Amy's powerful bodies remained unaffected by the extreme conditions. The glow from the magma pits made the entire descent feel like a journey into the underworld. "It almost sounds like the planet is breathing," Gustav voiced. "The core of a planet is a place of immense energy. It feels alive because we're getting closer," Miss Amy responded without coming to a stop. Gustav looked around as his face was illuminated with red glow. "I've been thinking about the Slarkovs. They must have had some way of predicting this catastrophe. But how did they know it would happen?" Miss Amy considered his question while they kept stepping forward. "The Slarkovs were masters of advanced technology and foresight. They likely had systems in place to monitor their solar system. When they detected the warp demolator, they would have known it was only a matter of time before their world was dragged through it." "But why Earth?" Gustav asked while leaping to a lower ledge. "Of all the planets, why choose Earth as their refuge?" Miss Amy moved almost like she was floating while answering Gustav. "They must have seen some kind of potential on Earth. If there's more to it, I have a feeling you'll find out down there." Gustav nodded thoughtfully. "They sure had everyone fooled. There better be a good reason why they never mentioned the warp demolator." The path grew steeper, and they had to slow their pace to navigate the treacherous terrain. "Will I truly find out everything in Dimension 6? Gustav wondered out loud. "I believe so," Miss Amy replied with a confident tone. "Unless that time candidate person is wrong." Gustav took a deep breath. They continued their descent and the bubbling sound of magma growing louder with each step. "I wonder what would have happened if the Slarkovs had stayed and found a way to save their planet? Mixed bloods most likely wouldn't exist and all the technology." Gustav realized how choosing Earth really set many things in motion. Miss Amy shook her head. "The Slarkovs made the best choice they could under the circumstances. Staying would have meant certain death. By fleeing to Earth, they ensured their survival and the continuation of their legacy. As much as I hate the existence of mixed bloods which was due to their decision, I am grateful for your existence. So I guess it's not all bad. Gustav glanced at her briefly. Pfft. It's the same for me, Miss Amy. Although I can't help but wonder if the world would have been kinder without bloodiness. The glow from the magma pits grew brighter, casting an almost blinding light on the rocky surfaces. The heat was now beyond bearable for fabrics. Scorched holes were starting to appear on Gustav's clothes. How much further do you think we have to go? Gustav was worried about being stripped completely naked before they arrived at their destination. We're getting close, Miss Amy replied. Gustav was sure he had heard that before, but he decided to take Miss Amy's word for it. They continued to navigate the treacherous terrain, the path becoming increasingly unstable. Rocks crumbled beneath their feet, and the air was filled with the sound of distant rumbling. Back on planet Agon, it had already been a couple of days. Yet the air still carried the scent of Gustav's bittersweet departure. The group stood in a clearing surrounded by towering trees, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze. Endrik stood at the center of the group, his expression resolute. I need to find the other time candidate, he announced. The fifth sacred item of the outworldly is crucial, and it's taking too long. Understandable, but not outer space missions for me at the moment. I think I need to spend some time with my earthly father. I haven't properly caught up with him, and I owe him that much, Falco said to everyone. Angie looked at Endrik in concern. I wanted to wait here on planet Agon, but Ethereal informed me that when Gustav returns, he will appear in a different location. Stepped forward. Angie, do you want to go back to the MBO in the meantime? It's better than waiting here without knowing where Gustav will show up. Angie sighed, her shoulders relaxing a bit. That's true. I'm still an MBO officer after all. Ildris smiled with a calm look. I need to return to my family. It's time I take my position as the leader. I can no longer ignore my father's legacy. Besides, those bastards don't deserve it. A spark of excitement appeared in Ria's eyes as he spoke up. Endrik, I'm coming with you. I want to go on missions outside Earth. Endrik turned to him, his expression serious. Ria, it's going to be dangerous. We're going after a time candidate. There's no telling what we might encounter. Ria's resolve was unwavering. I know. But I'm ready for it. The group fell silent, the weight of their decisions hanging in the air. They had been through so much together, and now it was time for some to go their separate ways pending Gustav's return. Endrik suddenly cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. Listen, everyone. We need to be prepared for Gustav's return. When he comes back, a battle line will be drawn. We have to be ready for whatever challenges lie ahead. He furrowed his brows. A battle line? What do you mean, Endrik? Endrik met his gaze with a serious expression. Gustav's return will mark the beginning of a new conflict. I believe it will be at a time where he is ready to face them head-on. We must be ready to stand with him. The fourth premonition is only a few months away. Angie had a perturbed expression. What if Gustav doesn't return in time? What do we do then? Endrik took a deep breath. If Gustav hasn't returned by then, it will be up to us to prevent the devastation. We must be prepared for anything. Chapter 1540 Preparing for Future War. 1540 Preparing for Future War. Author's note. Unedited chapter. Ildris addressed the group. We have our individual paths to follow, but our ultimate goal is the same. We must stay connected and be ready to support each other when the time comes. We've been through a lot together. No matter where we go or what we face, we are family. Stay safe, everyone, we'll meet again, Endrik stated. Take care, everyone. I'll see you when I see you, Falco added. Be careful out there. Do come back safely, Angie said to Endrik. Clapped Endrik on the shoulder. Keep in touch, all right? The group told one another goodbye and got ready to part ways. Ria grinned in excitement. Let's go, Endrik. Adventure awaits. You know, it's not all gonna be that simple, right? Endrick had to remind Rhea that it was going to be dangerous. With their farewells said, the group began to disperse. Falco turned to head back to Earth, his mind already on the reunion with his father. Engie prepared to return to the MBONE. He was ready to head back to the Independent Council. They could only hope for Gustav's safe return. Ildris set off to take his rightful place as the leader of his family. Endrick and Rhea set off together in Gustav's spacecraft. This mission is important. The Outworldly needs all of his sacred items. Rhea nodded. I understand, Endrick. I intend to take it seriously. In a high-tech laboratory on a secluded part of Earth, the air buzzed with the soft whir of advanced machinery and the faint crackle of static from numerous holographic projections. The room was large and filled with gleaming surfaces as well as an intricate array of scientific instruments. Holograms of molecular structures, energy fields, and biomechanical blueprints floated in the air, casting a soft blue glow over the metallic walls. Grand Commander Cheyenne, an elderly but authoritative-looking man with a mane of silver hair and a diamond shard embedded in his forehead, stood at the center of this laboratory. His silvery eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail with an unreadable expression. Beside him was Scientist Merkel, a slim man with sharp features and intense, intelligent eyes that seemed to see beyond the present. Merkel, Cheyenne began with a resonant and commanding tone. You mentioned a breakthrough in your research regarding the Dark Plane. I'm eager to hear the details. Scientist Merkel nodded with a spark of excitement in his eyes. Indeed, Grand Commander Cheyenne. We have made significant progress. Our research team has been working tirelessly, and we've developed 2 new methods that could change the tide in our struggle against the Dark Plane. Grand Commander Cheyenne's expression remained stern, though his interest was piqued. Go on. Merkel gestured to a nearby holographic display, which shifted to show a complex energy diagram. The first method involves stabilizing our soldiers' strength while they're in the Dark Plane. As you know, the Dark Plane has a debilitating effect on our forces, weakening them significantly. We've discovered a way to counteract this effect, allowing our soldiers to maintain their regular strength levels despite the plane's influence. Grand Commander Cheyenne nodded while absorbing the information. That is indeed promising. But you mentioned a second method as well? Scientist Merkel's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and caution. Yes, the second method is even more revolutionary. We've found a way to harness the Dark Plane's unique energy fields to amplify our soldiers' strength to unprecedented levels. By tapping into the Dark Plane's latent power, we can significantly enhance their abilities, potentially giving us a decisive advantage. However, that isn't all. This second method is also more complex because this technique harnesses energy from both the Dark Plane and the future potential of the mixed-blood soldiers. The result is a dramatic amplification of their strength, multiplying their capabilities many times over. Cheyenne raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. Amplifying their strength sounds like a significant advantage. Why not focus solely on that? Merkel sighed, knowing the difficult truth he had to convey. While the amplification method offers immense power, it comes with severe risks. The Dark Plane's energy is highly volatile and unpredictable. By tapping into their future selves, the soldiers effectively accelerate their life force consumption. After the battle, they are likely to perish due to the immense strain on their bodies and minds. Cheyenne's eyes narrowed, considering the implications. I see. So, the first method provides stability and safety, while the second offers power but with greater risks. Exactly, Merkel affirmed. We must weigh the benefits against the potential dangers. While the amplification method could give us a critical edge in battle, we must be cautious in its application. A heavy silence settled over the room as Grand Commander Cheyenne absorbed the gravity of Merkel's words. So, if we pick the amplification method, we're asking our soldiers to make the ultimate sacrifice, Cheyenne said slowly with a heavy voice. Yet, if we're not ready to put everything on the line, we risk losing the battle entirely. Merkel nodded with a resolute expression. Cheyenne's gaze was intense as he considered the options. This is a difficult decision, but one we must make with clear eyes. We cannot afford to lose this battle. Focus your efforts on refining the amplification method. We need to ensure it is as effective and safe as possible under the circumstances. Merkel met Cheyenne's gaze, understanding the gravity of the command. I will prioritize the amplification method. Our team will work tirelessly to perfect it. With your permission, we will begin advanced trials immediately. You have my permission. How soon can we expect results? Grand Commander Cheyenne inquired. Merkel considered the timeline, already calculating the necessary steps. If all goes well, we should have preliminary results within the next few weeks. We'll start with controlled simulations and move to live trials as soon as we are confident in the process. Cheyenne's expression softened slightly, showing a rare moment of empathy. Remember, Merkel, these are not just soldiers. They are our people, the live blood of the future generation. Ensure that every precaution is taken to protect them, even as we push forward. Merkel placed a reassuring hand on Cheyenne's arm. I understand, Grand Commander. We will do everything in our power to safeguard their lives and honor their sacrifices. Grand Commander Cheyenne nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. Good. Keep me informed of your progress. The fate of our forces, and perhaps even the fate of Earth and the entire universe, rests on our ability to navigate these challenges. With a final nod, Grand Commander Cheyenne turned and left the laboratory. His mind was already shifting to the broader strategic implications of their work and how he would break the news to the other Grand Commanders. Merkel watched him go, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. The lab buzzed with a renewed sense of urgency as scientist Merkel briefed his team, outlining the critical steps needed to advance their research. The following days were a blur of intense activity. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock, their focus on perfecting the amplification method. The air was filled with the vibrations of advanced machinery, the flicker of holographic displays, and the quiet murmur of intense discussions. Grand Commander Cheyenne visited frequently to observe the simulations, review data, and provided guidance. His authoritative demeanor inspired confidence and determination in the team. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows over the secluded facility, Cheyenne and Merkel stood before a large holographic projection displaying the latest data from the trials. The screen showed a detailed analysis of the energy flow, the physiological impacts on the soldiers, and the projected outcomes of the amplification process. Merkel, these preliminary results look promising. Grand Commander Cheyenne remarked as his eyes scanned the data. But we must be absolutely certain before we move to live trials. The stakes are too high for any margin of error. Merkel nodded with a serious expression. Serious. I agree, Grand Commander. We've seen significant improvements in the simulations, but we need to ensure the process is as stable as possible. We're conducting rigorous stress tests and refining the energy transfer protocols to minimize the risks. Cheyenne's gaze was intense. And the soldiers? Have you identified those willing to undergo the trials? Yes, Merkel replied. We've carefully selected volunteers who understand the risks and are prepared to make the sacrifice if necessary. They are some of our most dedicated and courageous individuals. Cheyenne had a slightly sentimental look in his eyes. Their bravery will not be forgotten. Ensure that they are given every support and preparation needed. They must be ready in mind and body. We will do everything we can to honor their commitment and protect their lives, Merkel stated. The days turned into weeks, and the trials progressed with increasing success. The team fine-tuned the amplification process, addressing each challenge with meticulous attention to detail. The volunteers underwent rigorous training, both physical and psychological, preparing themselves for the immense task ahead. Chapter 1541 Amplification Progress 1541 Amplification Progress Author's Note, unedited chapter within the laboratory. Holographic projections filled the space, displaying streams of data, complex energy diagrams, and molecular structures. Grand Commander Cheyenne stood with an imposing look with his silver hair and the diamond shard embedded in his forehead before scientist Merkel. Merkel's intense eyes adjusted the holographic display to show the latest findings. Grand Commander, based on our current progress, the amplification method should be ready for implementation in a few weeks. We've made significant strides in stabilizing the energy transfer and minimizing the risks. Cheyenne nodded thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the detailed data before him. Excellent work, Merkel. This breakthrough could be pivotal in our struggle against the Dark Plane. Merkel's expression was resolute. But still we must tread carefully, Grand Commander. I can only hope the training and psychological preparation for our soldiers yield results. Indeed, we must balance the need for power with the imperative of safety. I will inform the other 4 Grand Commanders of our progress. Together, we will decide the next steps for the future of Earth and the universe as a whole, Grand Commander Cheyenne stated. I will continue to refine the process and ensure that everything is ready for the trials, Scientist Merkel responded. As Cheyenne turned to leave the laboratory, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room. The winds of ominousity. As he reached a private area, Grand Commander Cheyenne activated the secure link to the other Grand Commanders. Holographic images of 4 distinguished figures appeared before him, each one representing a pillar of strength and leadership. Grand Commanders, Cheyenne began, his voice carrying the weight of their collective responsibility. I have urgent updates regarding our efforts against the Dark Plane. Scientist Merkel and his team have made significant progress with the amplification method. It should be ready for implementation in a few weeks. Grand Commander Alara, a formidable-looking woman with green eyes and a calm demeanor, nodded. This is indeed promising news, Grand Commander Cheyenne. The amplification of our soldiers' strength could turn the tide in our favor. Another Grand Commander leaned forward with a stern expression. What about the risks involved, Grand Commander Cheyenne? We cannot afford to proceed without understanding the full implications. There is no sugarcoating it. It's dangerous and can lead to their demise. The amplification method draws power from both the Dark Plane and the future potential of our mixed-blood soldiers. While it offers immense strength, it is also highly taxing. Prolonged use could result in the death of the soldiers involved. Only those willing to make the ultimate sacrifice would be considered for this task. Grand Commander Zorin, an elderly man with a wise and contemplative air, spoke up. We must be cautious. The balance of power and safety is delicate. What measures are in place to ensure our soldiers are adequately prepared? Merkel is refining the process and implementing rigorous training and psychological preparation. Volunteers will be the first to give it a try so we may know what step to take next. If our soldiers are to make such sacrifices, we need to ensure it is for a decisive victory. We cannot afford to squander their lives, another Grand Commander stated. Cheyenne's gaze was steady. I agree. This is why we must coordinate our efforts and plan our next steps carefully. The decision we make here will shape the future of Earth and the universe. The holographic images of the Grand Commanders flickered slightly. After a moment of silence, Alara spoke with a resolute tone. We will convene again once the trials are complete to decide on the deployment. Cheyenne nodded. I will keep you all updated. As the communication ended, Cheyenne stood in the quiet room with an indescribable expression. The winds of foreboding seemed to whisper through the walls. Returning to the laboratory, Cheyenne found Merkel and his team deep in their work. He approached Merkel, his presence commanding attention. Merkel, the other Grand Commanders are informed. We have their support, but we must proceed with caution. Merkel nodded. We will not falter. Our efforts will be thorough and precise. They proceeded with their work in the laboratory, conducting simulations and stress tests to ensure stability and safety. The first selected volunteers underwent rigorous training, their resolve unwavering in the face of the immense task ahead. One evening, as the final preparations were underway, Cheyenne gathered the team for a briefing. The room was filled with anticipation and determination. Holographic displays flickered with the latest data, casting a soft glow over the faces of those present. Everyone, Cheyenne began, his voice resonating with authority. We stand on the brink of a new era. The work you have done here is nothing short of remarkable. The time has come to take the next step. He turned to the volunteers. You are the best of us. Your courage and dedication are an inspiration. As you prepare to engage in these trials, know that you carry the hopes and strength of all of us. We are with you, every step of the way. The volunteers stood tall, their faces reflecting a mix of pride and determination. One of them, a young woman named Kira, spoke. We know the risks, sir, and we accept them. For our people, for our future, we will do whatever it takes. Cheyenne nodded while smiling. Thank you, Kira. Your bravery honors us all. As the volunteers prepared for the trials, the laboratory buzzed with activity. Final checks were made, systems calibrated, and the amplification process initiated. The moment arrived, and the volunteers stepped into the controlled environment for the trials. The lab fell silent, every eye fixed on the holographic displays tracking their progress. Seconds turned into minutes, each one filled with anticipation and anxiety. The data streams fluctuated, reflecting the intense energy transfer and the physical toll on the volunteers. Back on the desolate planet Humbad, the journey down the chasm had been arduous for Gustav and Miss Amy. The days stretched into a week, each one filled with the oppressive heat and the constant vigilance required to navigate the treacherous path. The walls of the chasm were lined with jagged rocks and strange, glowing symbols that seemed to pulsate with an eerie energy. The scent of sulfur drizzled across the air, and the distant rumble of magma pits provided a constant, ominous soundtrack to their descent. We've been descending for so long, Gustav remarked with a slightly distraught look. Are we ever going to reach the bottom? Miss Amy nodded. We're getting close, but it appears the bottom isn't what we expected. Look! Gustav followed her gaze and saw the chasm's floor ahead, but it was covered in a bubbling, magma-like liquid. Pillars of rock protruded from the molten surface, creating a dangerous and unpredictable terrain. The red glow from the magma illuminated the entire area, casting long, flickering shadows on the rocky walls. Be careful, Miss Amy cautioned. I'm sure it'll be fine. I just wish we could move faster. Gustav let out a little sigh. They moved carefully with deliberate and measured steps. The heat from the magma had risen to unprecedented heights, but they were still okay. The rocky pillars provided some stability, but they had to be cautious, testing each foothold before putting their weight on it. 10:28 As they continued, the sights around them became more intricate. Debris from what looked like ancient structures lay scattered across the chasm, remnants of a civilization long gone. The pillars of rock protruding from the magma reminded him of a twisted, otherworldly landscape, like something out of a nightmare. Do you think this place was once inhabited? Gustav asked, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chasm. Miss Amy nodded. It's possible. If Dimension 6 was always located here, then it makes sense for the surroundings to have been formerly inhabited. They continued their cautious descent as the heat kept intensifying. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached a relatively stable area near the bottom. The man-like liquid was still everywhere, but there were enough solid footholds to navigate without stepping directly into it. I don't see much roads to move on, he said to Miss Amy, eyes scanning the area for a safe path. Just keep following me. They moved carefully, testing each step before committing to it. The bubbling magma hissed and popped around them, the heat radiating off the surface in waves. After days of navigating the treacherous chasm, Gustav and Miss Amy finally reached what appeared to be the real bottom. The landscape before them was a vast expanse of bubbling, man-like liquid stretching across thousands of miles, glowing with a malevolent red hue. The entire scene was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Gustav was almost completely stark naked at this point. Inasmuch as he would have loved to take out another attire from his spatial storage space, using any form of energy could cause problems. Gustav stopped at the edge, staring out over the molten expanse. We can't move any further. His voice tinged with frustration. How are we supposed to find anything down here? Chapter 1542 Entry Point Hindrance. Chapter 1542 Entry Point Hindrance. Author's note. Unedited chapter. Miss Amy didn't respond immediately. Instead, she continued walking forward, with confident and deliberate strides. Gustav watched in surprise as the magma-like liquid began to part before her, creating a narrow path through the molten sea. Gustav's eyes widened in astonishment. "Miss Amy, what are you doing? I thought you said not to use abilities." Miss Amy glanced back at him with a calm smile on her face. "Gustav, I am a transcendent being. My abilities won't affect the integrity of this planet's fragile core. I can create a path for us." Gustav hesitated for a moment before following her, carefully stepping onto the newly formed path. The heat radiating from the magma was intense, but the path Miss Amy created was cool and solid under his feet. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Gustav asked as they walked, his voice a mixture of relief and curiosity. Miss Amy's smile widened. "I wanted you to see the magnitude of what we are dealing with. Sometimes, experiencing the journey firsthand is the best way to understand the challenges we face." Gustav nodded, absorbing her words. "So, where are we headed now?" "To the heart of this place," Miss Amy replied. "The path will lead us to it." They continued walking, the path winding through the sea of molten liquid. The glowing magma cast eerie shadows on the cavern walls, creating a surreal and otherworldly atmosphere. Gustav couldn't help but marvel at the sight, even as he remained vigilant for any signs of danger. As they walked, Gustav's mind raced with questions. "Miss Amy, what exactly are we looking for down here?" "We'll know when we see it," Miss Amy answered. Gustav was just curious as to what to look out for, but it seemed like Miss Amy wasn't too sure herself. As Gustav and Miss Amy continued their journey forward, the magma-like liquid continued to part before them, creating a pathway that snaked through the vast expanse of molten rock. The walls of magma rose on either side, forming a corridor that shimmered with intense heat and light. Despite the treacherous surroundings, Gustav felt a sense of calm. His trust in Miss Amy's abilities were unwavering. They walked in silence for what seemed like hours, the only sounds being the bubbling of the magma and the soft tap of their own footsteps. The path beneath their feet gradually began to change, shifting from the rough, uneven surface of the chasm to something more refined and constructed. The ground took on a smoother texture, and intricate patterns began to emerge, etched into the very rock itself. Gustav paused, glancing around in awe. "The ground here, it's unscathed." Miss Amy nodded. "Yes, kiddo. We're getting closer." As they continued, the refined ground gave way to an expansive platform that stretched out before them. It was incredibly large, its surface unscathed by the surrounding magma. The platform's structure was nearly indescribable. It was a blend of intricate patterns and futuristic designs that seemed both ancient and advanced. At the center of the platform stood a structure that seemed to defy the very fabric of reality. It was both in time and out of time, a paradoxical blend of past and future. Various technological constructs adorned its surface, their designs sleek and incredibly advanced. Holographic interfaces flickered with streams of data, and strange, glowing symbols adorned the walls. Gustav's eyes widened in astonishment. "Is this it?" Miss Amy smiled, her eyes filled with a sense of reverence. "Yes, Gustav, this is Dimension 6. Gustav stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the structure. "Dimension 6. At last." However, Gustav couldn't see the system notification alert that he had completed the second 5 years quest just yet. He figured that he probably needed to get in first. "The knowledge and power contained here will help you understand your origins. Prepare yourself, Gustav. What you'll find in there will be beyond your current imagination." "Bet," Gustav mumbled. They approached the structure, the air around them thrummed with energy. Gustav could feel the power radiating from the platform, a tangible force that seemed to resonate with his very being. The intricate patterns on the ground pulsed with light, guiding their steps toward the heart of Dimension 6. Miss Amy and Gustav reached the entry point of Dimension 6, only to find themselves unable to proceed. An invisible force seemed to push them back, preventing any further movement. The air around them thrummed with a strange energy, and the very fabric of reality seemed to shimmer and distort. Gustav frowned as his brows furrowed. "Is there some sort of code for access?" Miss Amy's eyes scanned the surroundings. Let's look around. The answers are often hidden in plain sight. Gustav turned his attention to the walls around them, noticing for the intricate artistic depictions that adorned the stone. The carvings were beautiful and elaborate, telling a story through a series of images and symbols. He moved closer, examining them with keen interest. These carvings, they tell a tale, Gustav said, his voice filled with wonder. It's about the creation and access to Dimension 6. Miss Amy nodded, joining him in examining the depictions. Looks like the Slarkovs recorded some of their history and knowledge through art. Let's see what we can learn. As they studied the carvings, the story began to unfold. The first series of images showed a group of beings, presumably the Slarkovs, standing before a darkened sky. Then a drop of something that looked like a water but certainly wasn't water, fell to the ground. The ground caved in and some impossible structures came into existence. That was Dimension 6. A place depicted as a realm of infinite possibilities, where wishes could be granted, and resources were abundant. Oh? Gustav mused. It was like a paradise. A realm where anything was possible. Miss Amy pointed to the next set of images. But look here. The dimension seemed to have demanded something in return. The images showed a series of warnings, depicted through symbolic representations. The message was clear: the dimension would grant anything you needed, but greed would be met with severe punishment. The final images were grim, showing individuals who had ignored the warnings being met with gruesome fates. So, the dimension punishes greed, Gustav said slowly. It only grants what you need, not what you want. Those who were greedy face dire consequences. Miss Amy's expression was serious. It looks like the power of Dimension 6 is immense, but it wishes to be respected. It possesses sentience. We must be mindful of our intentions. Gustav nodded. There must be a way to pass this barrier. We must be something we're missing. They continued to examine the carvings, looking for any clues that might help them. Gustav's eyes fell on a small, almost hidden depiction near the bottom of one of the walls. It showed a figure getting something and afterwards getting pushed out. After the depictions, the images seemed to display some changes. People trying to get in but being unable to. There is no access. It's locked. Forever. Gustav came to this realization. If the dimension had been in existence since before the planet got pulled into the stagnant Siderus void, there was no doubt that it had been locked for centuries already. What were they supposed to do about that? There has to be some sort of way to get in, Gustav said while moving around. He went around again and scanned the surroundings multiple times, but still came up blank. It looked like Dimension 6 was thoroughly sealed without no form of entry. Did that mean coming here was for naught? He couldn't possibly let it end here now that they had reached this pivotal point. Miss Amy, can I use my abilities now? Gustav inquired. Yes, sure. Dimension 6 blankets the surroundings so the planet's core will be O. Even before Miss Amy could answer completely. Boom! Gustav had thrown a fist at the invisible barrier preventing them from moving any further. I don't think that's gonna. Before Miss Amy could caution him again. Boom! Gustav's fist rammed into it once more, causing the surroundings to tremble immensely. Despite the amount of strength Gustav put into his fists, they were unable to punch a hole through whatever was hindering them. He arched his arm back intensely, letting his energy climb to ridiculous levels as he prepared to strike again. Miss Amy's hair and clothes flapped intensely as the air crackled. He has really grown, she couldn't help but smile as she watched him from the side. Boom! Gustav's fist drove into the hindrance, causing a devastating clash to ring out as torrents of wind swept across the surroundings. Even the magma in the surroundings were affected by this, causing a storm of steam to erupt. After a couple of seconds, the steam slowly reduced and the hindering invisible wall remained unmoving. Even the ground beneath their feet didn't crack from Gustav's intensity. There was no doubt that Dimension 6 power was astronomical. Kohila! Gustav called forth as rhombus-shaped patterns of light surrounded his form. Chapter 1543 Reaching Dimension 6. Chapter 1543 Reaching Dimension 6 Author's Note. Unedited chapter. Gustav stared at the structure, his eyes wide with awe. What is that? Miss Amy's eyes were filled with wonder. It looks like some kind of temple or shrine. This must be the heart of the chasm, where the answers we seek are hidden. They carefully made their way towards the structure, using the rocky pillars and ledges to navigate the treacherous terrain. As they approached, Gustav could see that the structure was covered in intricate carvings and symbols, similar to those they had seen on the walls of the chasm. This place is incredible, Gustav said, his voice filled with awe. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. Miss Amy nodded, her eyes scanning the carvings. These symbols, they tell a story. We need to decipher them to understand what happened here. They carefully examined the carvings, their eyes tracing the intricate designs and patterns. The symbols seemed to depict a history of the Slarkovs, their rise to power, and their eventual fall. Gustav felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized the significance of what they were seeing. This is it, Gustav said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is the key to understanding my past. Miss Amy nodded, her eyes filled with determination. We need to be thorough. Let's document everything we can and try to piece together the story. They spent hours carefully examining the carvings, documenting every detail. The story they uncovered was one of power, ambition, and ultimately, tragedy. The Slarkovs had been a powerful civilization, but their hubris had led to their downfall. The warp demolator had dragged their planet into the stagnant Sider's void, and they had fled to Earth in a desperate bid for survival. This is incredible, Gustav said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and sadness. They were so powerful, but they couldn't escape their fate. Miss Amy placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The past is filled with lessons. We must learn from them, and use that knowledge to shape our future. Gustav nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. You're right. We need to take this information back and use it to understand the connection to my past and the challenges we face. As they continued their exploration of the ancient structure, Gustav couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the sheer scale of the place. The carvings and symbols told a story that spanned centuries, a testament to the power and ambition of the Slarkovs. Miss Amy, Gustav said, his voice filled with determination. We need to make sure this knowledge isn't lost. We need to document everything and take it back with us. Miss Amy nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. Agreed. This information is too important. We must ensure it is preserved and used to guide our future. As they carefully documented the carvings and symbols, Gustav felt a sense of connection to the ancient civilization. The Slarkovs had been powerful, but their ambition had led to their downfall. He vowed to learn from their mistakes and use the knowledge they had uncovered to shape a better future. After hours of careful documentation, they finally had a comprehensive record of the carvings and symbols. Exhausted but satisfied, they made their way back to the solid ledge overlooking the chasm. We did it, Gustav said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and accomplishment. We uncovered the truth. Miss Amy nodded, her eyes filled with pride. Yes, we did. Now we must use this knowledge to guide us forward. As they began their ascent back up the chasm, Gustav felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey had been long and arduous, but they had uncovered the secrets of the past and gained the knowledge they needed to face the challenges ahead. The climb back up was just as treacherous as the descent, but Gustav and Miss Amy moved with a sense of determination and resolve. They navigated the rocky pillars and ledges with care, avoiding the bubbling magma below. As they reached the upper levels of the chasm, Gustav couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the journey they had undertaken. They had descended into the depths of the planet and uncovered the secrets of an ancient civilization. The knowledge they had gained would guide them in the challenges ahead. Finally, after days of climbing, they reached the top of the chasm. Exhausted but triumphant, they looked out over the desolate landscape of planet Humbad. We did it, Gustav said, his voice filled with pride. We uncovered the truth and made it back. Miss Amy nodded, her eyes filled with determination. Yes, we did. And now, We must use this knowledge to face the challenges ahead and shape a better future. As they began their journey back to their base, Gustav felt a renewed sense of purpose. The knowledge they had gained from the depths of the chasm would guide them in the battles ahead, and he was determined to use it to create a better future for himself and those he cared about. The journey had been long and arduous, but the knowledge they had uncovered was invaluable. As they made their way back across the desolate landscape after days of navigating the treacherous chasm, Gustav and Miss Amy finally reached what appeared to be the real bottom. The landscape before them was a vast expanse of bubbling, man-like liquid stretching across thousands of miles, glowing with a malevolent red hue. The heat was intense, and the air was thick with the smell of sulfur. The entire scene was both mesmerizing and terrifying, a stark reminder of the planet's volatile nature. Gustav stopped at the edge, staring out over the molten expanse. "We can't move any further," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "How are we supposed to find anything down here?" Miss Amy didn't respond immediately. Instead, she continued walking forward, her steps confident and deliberate. Gustav watched in surprise as the man-like liquid began to part before her, creating a narrow path through the molten sea. Gustav's eyes widened in astonishment. "Miss Amy, what are you doing? I thought you said not to use abilities." Miss Amy glanced back at him, a calm smile on her face. "Gustav, I am a transcendent being. My abilities won't affect the integrity of this planet's fragile core. I can create a path for us." Gustav hesitated for a moment before following her, carefully stepping onto the newly formed path. The heat radiating from the magma was intense, but the path Miss Amy created was cool and solid under his feet. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" Gustav asked as they walked, his voice a mixture of relief and curiosity. Miss Amy's smile widened. "I wanted you to see the magnitude of what we are dealing with. Sometimes, experiencing the journey firsthand is the best way to understand the challenges we face." Gustav nodded, absorbing her words. "So, where are we headed now?" "To the heart of this place," Miss Amy replied. "There is something here that holds the answers we seek. The path will lead us to it." They continued walking, the path winding through the sea of molten liquid. The glowing magma cast eerie shadows on the cavern walls, creating a surreal and otherworldly atmosphere. Gustav couldn't help but marvel at the sight, even as he remained vigilant for any signs of danger. As they walked, Gustav's mind raced with questions. "Miss Amy, what exactly are we looking for down here?" "There is a chamber deep within this chasm," she explained. "It holds ancient knowledge and artifacts that can help us understand the connection between you and the Slarkovs. It is also the key to unlocking the power you possess." Gustav's curiosity deepened. "And this chamber, it's been here for how long?" "Centuries, perhaps millennia," Miss Amy said. "The Slarkovs were a powerful civilization, and they left behind many secrets. This is one of their most guarded locations." As they continued down the path, Gustav noticed that the air seemed to grow cooler, and the light from the magma dimmed slightly. They were approaching a massive, ancient structure embedded in the cavern wall. It was covered in intricate carvings and symbols, similar to those they had seen earlier but far more elaborate. "This is it," Miss Amy said, stopping before the structure. "The entrance to the chamber." Gustav stared at the structure, awe and apprehension mixing in his expression. "What do we need to do to get inside?" Miss Amy placed her hand on the carvings, and they began to glow with a soft blue light. The ground beneath them rumbled, and a hidden door slowly slid open, revealing a dark passageway. "Follow me," Miss Amy said, stepping into the passageway. Gustav took a deep breath and followed her, the door closing behind them. The passageway was dimly lit by the same blue glow from the carvings, casting an ethereal light on the walls. As they moved deeper, the air grew cooler, and the rumbling of the magma receded, replaced by an almost tangible sense of ancient power. "Miss Amy," Gustav said quietly, "what exactly will we find in this chamber?" "Knowledge," she replied. "And power. The Slarkovs left behind many artifacts that can help you understand your heritage and unlock your potential. But be prepared, Gustav. The journey ahead will not be easy. Gustav nodded, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. As they reached the end of the passageway, they entered a vast chamber filled with towering columns and ancient relics. The walls were covered in more of the glowing carvings, and the air was thick with the sense of history and power. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.